Another short story by Sebastion Szukalski. To dust. Speckles of dust spiraled clumsily through the stirring air, constantly being disturbed by the open window's wind, illuminated by the soft yellow light of the morning which spewed forth over the horizon. The paint was dry in the room, peeling from the walls, revealing the wallpaper of an era long since past, a memory of a fading history, and a fan hung still and dead from the ceiling. Deprived of all sources of electricity, its light long since gone dark. Within the dusty room and beyond the curtained window, in a large creaking leather armchair sat a man, a suit draped over his frail frame, his skin dry, wrinkled, and pale like a crumbling parchment, his eyes as empty as ink blots upon it. The dust clung heavily to the charcoal grey fabric of his suit, filming it with an impoverished look, and his mouth forever tasted it. His eyes, dark and ominous, stared into space, affixed upon his comrade, scrutinizing his posture, which had sagged in his advanced age, and his teeth, which grew dark and sickly from his blackened gums, which revealed in his frown. His hair was grey and weak, and his arms were thin and body malnourished. For hours he had stared at this man, who stared back at him, dark eyes constantly following his, as though they both thought alike. Neither were warm to one another, and from his creaky armchair he pondered what this man was thinking. For he knew him to be a violent man, for few who weren't still survived in this harsh, dusty environment, one of few which still held life after the war. Survival was harsh, forcing the inhabitant to fight for resources and power. They had fought also. He had lost part of himself in the fight for life, and now he sat empty and fatigued, lifeless, as did his comrade, whose laboured breath mimicked his own with infuriating accuracy. How he loathed that figure, its face silhouetted by his angle to the sun, lips pursed in equal distaste, frowned by the mirror's gilded edges, man, I keep reading, and coated in a layer of dust that covered its once silvery reflection. His chest heavily lighted, his chest heaved lightly, his lungs never clear, never full. His mind tore at his body, commanding it to move, screaming at it to return to him, to come to his command. But it refused. Stubbornly his body sat, his mind free to hate it, to despise it. For days he sat catatonic, and waited for death to take him. He was drained, weak, incapable of survival, but with every fibre of his being he wished to live. His mind wandered back to his memory before the war, when this land was alive with sparks and lights, noise and emotion, which now lay barren and desperate for rain or life. Nothing grew, only hatred and hardiness, yet here he belonged, to the empty desolation of the last bastion of civilization, as far as the eye could see. Here, in a decrepit cell, the dusty hotel room, his body had finally failed him. He had no choice. He could no longer go on. He could go on no longer killing to survive, nor living off the meager scraps of food from before the war, which sat irritated in tins, irradiated, and ravaged his body as much as they nourished it. He was stuck between the will to live and the inability to fight it. His ravaged body as much as they nourished it. He was stuck between the will to live and the inability to fight. His arthritic joints weakened, old bones brittle, and eyes tired. He longed for peace, to sleep once more unafraid, and as his final rest approached, his mind returned to the present, and the world was filled with a sudden clarity. His mind was clear, and remembered what he had done to come here. All the grotesque crimes against his nature, It triumphs against men who wish to simply live, who simply wish to live. He was sick with guilt, and in his reminiscing, a memory stood above the rest, from a mere few days past. A mother with a child who must have been only just older than the war, scavenging for food among the ruins of the building, unarmed and harmless, their eyes scattering along the walls, wary of threats, and he had stood before them, eyes fierce and full of life, scanning the horizon for any sign of life, and he remembered how his heart had soared and beat like a thunder as the ambush came from behind him, gunshots piercing the woman who had fallen under to a child who attempts to protect it. Their child, who had stood armed and ready to protect, lay below his dying mother, whose blood bloomed into scarlet flowers, crimson petals falling onto the boy. And the old man's heart soared once again as he relived his wife's demise, and in its furious fervor beating like thunder once more. He remembered how his son was torn from her cold arms, and how his gun had once jammed, and now he had awoken bloodied and bruised, and crawled into his room, and his heart beat even faster, and then it stopped. Hang on, his heart beat ever faster, and then it stopped. His mind slowed, his lungs gave way to his final breath, and he was at peace. His age and words have taken their toll. The entire sun of his life, his final moments, were a broken man in a creaking armchair, deep in thought, remembering his son, who now lay either in a ditch or drugged in preparation to join whichever gang had kidnapped him. He had failed to protect him, failed as a father, and now for 73 years so had his body, which would soon join the dust that lay upon him. I don't know who 73 years is, but anyway. I promise everyone